Okay, so today we're going to be looking at how to repair this hole in the drywall, and I can tell you now it's a lot easier than you think. So stick around and we'll get right into it. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is you are going to take a offcut that is more or less the same size as the hole and just draw it out as I'm doing here. Now I'm going to show you three methods to actually cut this hole. The very first is with a Stanley knife. Make sure your blade's a little bit sharper than mine. I was in a bit of a rush, and it never pays to not be prepared, as it just makes your job more difficult. Okay, so the second method is to use a jigsaw. Just keep in mind that if your drywall is complete, in other words you've got the drywalling on the other side, you're going to have to cut your blade shorter, otherwise you're going to damage the drywall on the other side of the wall. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so the third method is using a multi-tool. This uses a vibrating blade instead of a spinning blade. And the beauty of this kind of tool is all the dust drops right down to the floor and it doesn't spread it all over the area or the room that you're working in. Okay, so the next step is just to install some cleats. And you can see I've just screwed through the drywall into the timber on the left. We see that red arrow. And then pretty much the same thing on the right into the other cleat, and that's just going to support the offcut that is going to be screwed in, as you'll see in the next step. Okay, so the next step is just to fit that offcut, and as you can see I've got a bit of a big gap at the top, and all you need to do is just make sure that your gaps are fairly even and just drive those screws in. Obviously I'm using drywall screws. They have a tendency not to pull through the drywall as opposed to chipboard screws, of course. Then just make sure that you also just countersink the screw heads, because you don't want those to be sticking out when you put your filler on. So in this step we are just going to be removing any sort of high spots or bits that are going to affect our skimming. And we're going to be using jointing compound, or mud as it's called in the States, and we just want to make sure that none of these little bits stick out. Now when applying your joint tape, just make sure that you've cleaned properly before you do that. You don't want any of that dust or any little bits sort of sticking underneath the joint tape, so just make sure you've cleaned that off really well with a broom or with a rag, and then just simply apply the joint tape so that the join is in the center of the tape. Okay, so the next step is to apply the jointing compound or joint compound, and as you can see what I'm actually doing is I'm trying to just apply it from the center of the joint tape outwards. So hopefully that makes sense. You don't actually want to pull the applicator down across the edge of the tape and pull it off. So this is a fairly simple process, and just keep on doing that until all of the joint tape is covered. This is just the first application, and in the second application we'll do the finishing. Okay, so here we're going to be just doing the second application, and what I sometimes do, depending on the situation, is I would make the jointing compound, I'd make it a little bit thinner. It makes it a bit easier to work. So that's just a tip for you to make your job a bit easier. And there's a lot of skill involved here, and I take my hat off to the guys that do this professionally. They are extremely good at getting a much better finish than I'm getting here. So I'm not an expert at this, so if I can do it, I'm pretty sure that you can too. Okay, so the very last step is to just do your sanding and make sure you get everything nice and smooth, and there are only two things you really need to focus on. Number one, any high spots need to be removed, like those ridges that you saw from the troweling. And the second thing is to feather out the edges so that they go from filler to no filler. And hopefully that kind of makes sense, that you're actually feathering out to make it all nice and smooth. So if you got some value from this video, then please don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. And I just want to leave you with one last tip. This is something I actually forgot to mention during my video. you can actually put some pencil marks on your area that you've filled. You should ideally do this before you start sanding. I kind of forgot to do this and I forgot to mention it, but that is something that you can do to just help you identify low spots. And then of course, if you do need to put a bit of spot filler on, or a third application if the drywall is very bad like this one is, then of course you can absolutely do that. So until next time, I bid you farewell. I hope you have a great day.